And When the Sky Was Opened is loosely based on Richard Matheson's short story, Disappearing Act, from 1953. The teleplay was written by Rod Serling and had very little to do with Matheson's piece, minus the idea of people disappearing from existence. Matheson was a prominent writer on the show, so it's unclear why he didn't adapt his own work. Serling did later mention that he wanted to make the story slightly more rational, which is why he used astronauts for the main characters instead of the writer character from the original story. Astronauts Clegg Forbes, Ed Harrington, and William Gart just returned from a mission 900 miles into space. About 4 hours into their voyage, they all blacked out and awoke 1 day later in the desert. Their ship crashed and Gart's leg injured. After being released from the hospital, Forbes and Harrington go out to celebrate when the latter gets a strange feeling. He calls his parents, who have no recollection of him, and soon after, he's gone, nowhere to be found. When Forbes asks around, he discovers that no one has ever heard of Ed Harrington, and even the newspaper hailing the 3 astronauts' safe return to Earth has changed, instead featuring a picture of just Forbes and Gart with no mention of Harrington anywhere. Clegg slowly starts panicking as he talks to person after person who tell him they never knew an Ed Harrington. Even back at the hospital, William Gart acts as if his co-pilot never existed. Forbes struggles to try and convince his remaining partner on the mission that there was a third astronaut before his fear of something similar happening to them comes to fruition. Director Douglas Hayes entered the Twilight Zone with this episode, but it was far from his last. He directed 3 others in the first season and 9 total. Rod Serling and producer Buck Houghton often encouraged directors to take initiative with the scripts and do something unexpected with their visualization. Hayes took that to heart, and there are a handful of examples in this episode that were strong directorial choices, which interpreted Serling's writing in a less predictable way. A few of the most obvious are Forbes bursting through the glass door of the bar and how the feeling of disappearing was portrayed. Originally, Serling had it written as a painful experience, but Hayes decided it would be more interesting if they played it up as a sort of euphoric event. The production team was impressed enough with his vision that they brought Hayes back many more times. The cast is very likable in this one. Led by Rod Taylor as U.S. Air Force Colonel Clegg Forbes, the panic of the situation plays out in our lead's frenetic performance. He's very believable as a man who's not sure what's going on or why it's happening. What I like most about his depiction is that he never doubts himself. Forbes is sure what he knows is fact, but that just makes everything all the more terrifying. You can almost put yourself in his shoes. How would you react if your best friend of 15 years vanished and the world around you functioned as if he or she never existed?
Ed Harrington! Ed Harrington! Why doesn't anybody remember me?
Eventually, he snaps when revisiting the bar Ed disappeared in. That's where the glass breaking comes in, as a very effective culmination of his anger and frustration. Rod Taylor was an Australian. His American accent is very convincing here. He was in many film projects over the years, including The Birds, Inglourious Basterds, and he even voiced Pongo in the original 101 Dalmatians animated movie. There are also some angles in this episode where he bears a strong resemblance to Robin Williams. Unimportant, but it was something I noticed. Charles Aidman as Harrington and Jim Hutton as Gart also bring a lot to their roles. Hutton plays concern, sympathy, and compassion for his friend Clegg when he's being told the wild story about a third astronaut he doesn't remember.
Clegg, I don't know Ed Harrington.
In the end, Forbes is correct about this phenomenon passing on to him as he starts to sense that same indescribable feeling Harrington did.
This is weird. It's just plain weird. Like I just don't belong.
That last camera movement panning around and under Forbes' face is a great one. Director Hayes said he did it to make it look as if the Colonel was ascending. Clegg then looks into the mirror to see no reflection. Well, almost. They sort of botched the angle of the mirror where you can still see his arm. They played that mirror up a few times earlier in the episode, too. He then gets completely hysterical and runs out of the room. When Gart looks into the hallway, Forbes is gone.
Colonel Forbes, somebody's got to help him right away. Who? Colonel Forbes!
Soon enough, Gart is gone too, in addition to the aircraft they traveled in. It's not explained what happened to them, as it's left up to the imagination. Rod Serling would later say that the bizarre question was enough without an exact answer. I agree that sometimes it is better to leave an ending open, but Twilight Zone is known for its outlandish twist finishes, and this lacking one is definitely out of the ordinary. There are a few lines that suggest some extraterrestrial force was responsible, that maybe somebody or something made a mistake and let them come back to Earth when they shouldn't have.
Gotta come back to get us. Somebody up there.
There's a shot earlier in the episode where Forbes backs out onto a balcony. The stars in the sky behind him are twinkling like the stars do in the Twilight Zone intro and outro. Is this the Twilight Zone itself distorting and changing existence? We know that moment was a purely visual directorial decision by Douglas Hayes, so my theory is likely not the answer, but I did find that interesting. Honestly, this story reminds me of an episode in Season 4 called The Parallel, where an astronaut returns to what seems to be home. However, in actuality, it's some sort of parallel universe with small differences from the world the astronaut remembers. So when answering how I'd fill in the blank on the ending of And When the Sky Was Open, I think an interesting explanation would be something similar. Or maybe the universe is just changing around them as it resets to how things were supposed to be. You could also say there are interdimensional alien beings pulling all those strings and warping reality as they abduct the astronauts. I want to hear what your explanation would be to the ending of this episode, so leave a comment below or drop me a line on Twitter. This is an episode worth revisiting, so I look forward to your answers. But one thing about this ending is for sure. It took place in the land of both shadow and substance, that we often call the Twilight Zone.